and I will turn things over to you, Kimber.
Okay.
Hang on just a second. You can talk, but just a second. I'm finishing getting it up.
Stop my sharing here.
Okay, we are ready. And good morning, Kimber.
Good morning. It's actually afternoon here, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we just got back from church a little bit ago. So do we have our Bible verses?
Not on this computer.
Okay.
As you can see, I'm all over the place. I'm remote for part of it and here for part of it. And so, no.
So you're here and there, huh?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's start with prayer and then we'll get into it. Our Father, we thank you for giving us the Sabbath day, and we thank you for all the information and thoughts and encouragement and so much more that you've given us in the Bible that we can learn from. And I just pray that as I'm sharing some thoughts here, that you would give me the right words to say and help us all to understand and know how to apply what we're learning. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, I'm going to bring up my screen here. Okay. And all right, I think we're up now. And we have this verse here from Mark 2:27. The Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. And I think that's an important thing, that God gave us the Sabbath for some really important reasons. And we'll look into that a little bit here. I've got some stories I want to share. I like to share stories, and these bring up a specific point. Manilik was born in the early 1800s among the Inupiat people of Northwest Alaska. Nothing is known about his father, but his mother was a very resourceful woman and taught him the skills he needed to get along well in that area by the Arctic Circle. And this is way up there, just pretty much right on the Arctic Circle, but it's way north. One day when he was out snaring some small animals to add to their food supply, he sat down to rest. While he sat there, he heard the strange call of a small bird, Ta'atagi'ik, Ta'atagi'ik. That translates in his language to father and son, father and son. He heard this several times when he sat in that spot. Later, the words expanded to Ta'atagi'ik, Ta'atagi'ik, Isrumik Sukti, Isrumik Sukti. This translates to father and son, the source of intelligence, the source of thought. Many times he was very late in returning home because he felt so peaceful and reverent when he heard those sounds. He eventually had the courage to tell his mother about what he was hearing and why he came home late. She thought he was turning into an afatkut, a shaman or spirit man, one who practiced the powers of the earth. As he grew older, he started receiving information from his source of intelligence and began sharing what he learned with his people. Other Afatkut became jealous of him because he said that many of the taboos of the Afatkut were not good and would be changed in the future, that their curses would be ineffective, and even the practice of being an Afatkut would someday cease. He often said to them, "You are deceived by one who is actually nothing. You believe in a useless troublemaker who only tries to make people live by the taboos. Why don't you believe instead in my grandfather above?" They got so angry with him that they even tried to kill him, but he had supernatural protection, sometimes even being surrounded by a brilliant light. He began making predictions that completely baffled his people. Someday you will receive visitors from the east who have light-colored skin and who travel swiftly over the water in boats that don't need to be paddled or pulled. You will also receive visitors who come traveling swiftly through the air in vehicles that are run by fire. People were very skeptical of such outrageous claims before the days of motorboats and airplanes. Remember, this was back in the 1800s. He started observing every seventh day as a sacred day. In those days, there were no calendars, but his source of intelligence revealed to him that Saturday was a day of rest. When that day came, he would not work and would simply rest. He carried a pole wherever he went, and on Saturday, he would attach an animal skin to the pole to indicate to those around that this was a rest day. People often said to him, "Why are you resting? You're just lazy. That's why you're not doing anything." He replied that he lived by the commandments of his grandfather in the sky. Later, after his death, when white missionaries arrived and started teaching the people, they changed that rest day to Sunday. He explained death as the place where people would come out from. He spoke of a time when the dead would rise again and enter a land of all good people. This land was abundant in plants and flowers, and it was a beautiful and joyful place. There were varying responses to what he did and said. Some people thought he was crazy and ridiculed him and said, "We hear that you speak of strange things. Go ahead and speak now." But he replied, "Unless I am directed by the one above who is dressed in white and whose aides are also dressed in white, I do not speak." Others had great respect for him and considered him a genuine prophet of God. Most of his predictions came true just as he described them. The elders among his people who knew him, or at least knew about him, believe that any unfulfilled predictions will still come true. And today there's an organization up in that area that's called the Manilik Association, and they provide various health and social services for the people in that area. So he was a real man, and people remember him, or at least they remember hearing about him, and they had great respect for him. And it's interesting how that God revealed certain things to him about Sabbath and about the angels and about death and things like that. It's just a fascinating story. Now we have another story here. Auqua was an Indian chief in an area in South America where Venezuela, Brazil, and Guyana come together. And you can see on the map there. This was in the early 1900s. He wanted to be a better ruler and make things better for his people. He asked the Great Spirit for help and started receiving visions. The first time he went into vision, the people thought he had died, but yet he was still standing. They tried to lay him down, but they couldn't move him. Then they discovered that he was still breathing, but very slowly. This was something strange that had never happened before. After coming out of vision, he told his people what God had shown him. He explained, "A person like a bright light came and talked to me, telling me things we should do." He received many visions where the angel would reveal things to him, and then he would teach his people about the God in heaven and other things that the Shining One taught him. Auqua told his people, "An angel has told me that a white man will come with a black book to teach us more about God's ways." Eagerly, Auqua waited for the man of his vision to appear. Before he died, he told his people not to give up, that soon a white man would come and teach them more. Elder O.E. Davis was a missionary living and working in Georgetown, Guyana. One day, a man who worked as a miner came into town with a note for Elder Davis. On the piece of paper was written a request that he would go out to where these Indians lived and teach them about God. This message troubled him, but he was too busy to leave his work and travel such a distance, not even knowing where to find these people. Sometime later, this same miner came again to Georgetown, bringing him a similar note. Elder Davis asked the miner who was giving him the notes with the request to come, and the miner told him, "A big man sent them, but that's all I know." As time passed, Elder Davis accumulated many of these notes, and he felt troubled about how to respond. One day, his wife found these notes in one of his pockets and asked her husband about them. After he explained how he received them, she said, "You need to go." And he finally agreed. Shortly afterward, sometime in 1910, Elder Davis left to go and find these Indians. During the journey, before arriving at Mount Roraima, where the Indians lived, he became ill with malaria and stopped at a miner's camp to gain his strength back. One day, as he was sitting outside reading his Bible, he saw a group of Indians running toward him. The miner yelled, "Run!" and took off. Elder Davis just stood there with his Bible behind his back, trying to protect it. As the Indians ran up and circled him, he quickly realized that they didn't want to hurt him. Instead, they seemed happy to see him and asked him to show them his black book. He was afraid they might take it away, and so he was reluctant to show it to them. When he finally showed them his Bible, they rejoiced and said, "We've been waiting many years for you to come." "How did you know I would come?" Davis asked. "An angel told Auqua, our chief, that a white man with a black book would come and teach us more. So sit down and teach us now." Even though Elder Davis tried to put them off until later, they insisted that they had waited long enough and wanted to know more now. "Sit down right now. We want to hear from the black book." He had no choice but to sit down and teach them. He began with the plan of salvation and simple Bible truths. "No, no," the Indians declared. "We know all that. Tell us more." Next, he started to share about the Bible Sabbath. But again, he was interrupted. "No, we understand about the true Sabbath. We know all that. Tell us more." He began explaining about the sanctuary and all of the symbolism and the meaning in it, only to discover that these Indians even knew that. Eventually, he found things they didn't understand. How long he stayed with them and they listened to him, we don't know. Could have been hours, might have been days. They had been traveling and were on their way back to their village when they came upon the white man with the black book. They returned to their village to tell their people about him. He had promised that he would come back as soon as he could. Sometime later, he did go back and spent more time teaching these Indians. But again, he became sick, and this time he did not recover. His grave is at the base of Mount Roraima. These Indians became known as the Davis Indians. You might have heard some stories about them. About 16 years later, another missionary family, Alfred and Betty Cott, and their little daughter Joyce, made the long and difficult trip into the jungle to continue ministering to these Indians. When they arrived at Auqua's village, the first thing the natives asked was to see their Bibles. After they had looked at the 3 Bibles, they were excited and said, "You are our missionaries." "How did you know that?" the Cotts asked. "Auqua said you would have a black book from a country called England, so we would know when the right people came." When the Cotts looked at their Bibles, they realized that all 3 had been printed in England. Auqua had told this to his people probably 25 years before that. As they started holding meetings to teach the people about the Bible, they realized that Auqua had already taught them many things. The angel had told him that the people should bathe in order to be clean, that they should have only one wife instead of multiple wives, that they should keep the Sabbath as a holy, work-free day from sundown on the 6th day to sundown on the 7th day, that they should eat less food on the Sabbath so they could have clearer thinking. He taught them the differences between clean and unclean meats, that blood should not be used as food, that they should not make alcoholic liquor. They learned about simple home remedies like using hot and cold water treatments. After Auqua built a church, the angel told him to designate someone to keep it clean and even bring in bouquets of jungle flowers to decorate it. They learned English and sang many English Christian hymns, even singing in multi-part harmony like a choir. A couple of their favorites were "Shall We Gather at the River" and "Jesus is Coming Again." They were familiar with many English Bible verses like Holy Bible, Hallelujah, New Jerusalem, Jesus, Satan, and other words before they even had their own Bible. The Indians knew and practiced all of these things before the missionaries arrived. So it's interesting again how God sent gave them a way to learn even before the missionaries came. He taught them personally about things they needed to know. It was March 19, 1939. Rain had not fallen in central Angola, Africa, and the crops did not grow. At the Namba Mission School, the situation was serious. Food had run out. There were no stores anywhere near, and no money to buy food, even if it had been available. The native mission director, Carlos Sigi, had been away for several weeks visiting some other mission stations. His wife called the local families together and explained the situation to them. She read some of God's promises and told them the story of the manna that he sent for his people in the time of Moses. She assured them that he could send food for them in the same way if necessary, and they prayed together. After prayer, her little girl, about 5 years old, went out of the house and in a short time came back with her hands filled with white stuff that she was eating. "What do you have there?" asked her mother. "I don't know, but I'm eating it." "Don't eat it, throw it away." "I've already eaten some of it. I saw 6 European men out there and they said, 'The Lord has answered your prayer and has sent you manna. Take it up and eat it.'" The others immediately went out and found many acres of ground covered with the white stuff. But the 6 men were nowhere around. They gathered as much of the manna as they needed, and it was just like the description in the Bible. It looked like coriander seed and tasted like wafers and honey. The manna fell every day except on Sabbath and was their main food source for a long time. A sample was sent to a lab for testing, and it consisted mostly of sugars, small amounts of nitrogen compounds, and oxides of metallic elements suitable for human consumption. So this is real stuff. And this picture that I have here actually came from a video where this story is told. The manna has continued to fall, though now it is not every day. It falls on Wednesdays and Fridays quite consistently, but never on Sabbath. Some who have tasted it say that it is indescribably good. But if someone in the village is practicing sin, the manna turns red and bitter until that person repents and turns back to God. And you can go online and put in a search for modern manna in Angola or something like that, and you can come up with, there's several videos that describe how this manna is still falling over there. Nikolai Panchuk was a Seventh-day Adventist pastor in Kiev in the Ukraine. He was arrested several times by the KGB. Each time they had tried to get him to reveal the names of the members of his multiple congregations, but he would not betray his people. Now he was in jail again. A guard took him to the warden's office, where the boss gave him one last chance to cooperate. He refused again and was finally sentenced to labor in a prison camp in Siberia. He knew that summers there were cool and damp, and that hordes of black flies and mosquitoes tormented every living thing. Winters were brutal, with temperatures getting down to 50 below zero and worse. The prison camps were so far from any civilization that escape was impossible. When he arrived at the camp, the warden assigned him to work with the camp carpenter. He wanted to explain to the warden that he couldn't work on Saturdays, but the warden didn't give him a chance. Things went okay until Sabbath morning. Nikolai didn't show up for work, and about noon, a guard came looking for him and demanded to know what was going on. When he tried to explain about not working on God's holy day, the guard flew into a rage and beat him with a nightstick. Then he dragged him off to face the warden, who had him tied to the flagpole and whipped until he was unconscious. The next Sabbath, he refused to work again, and this time the warden took him out to a shed and locked him in a wooden box that was just big enough to squat in, but not big enough to move or straighten his legs or get comfortable in any way. A guard brought him a little bit of water occasionally, but no food. He couldn't relieve himself in a toilet, and the mosquitoes and flies tormented him constantly. He was left there for 10 days. When the warden and the guard came the next Tuesday to let him out, he couldn't stand or walk, so the guard took him to a pile of straw where he could lay down for the rest of the day. He was able to work some at his assignments for the rest of the week, but when Sabbath came around again, the whole ordeal was repeated. This went on for almost 2 years. Nikolai would spend 10 days in the box, be out for 4 days, and then back to the box. One day, some high-ranking army officers showed up at the camp and started making rounds of inspection with the warden. After a while, they came to the shed where Nikolai was crouched in the box, and the warden had to explain to the colonel what the box was for and why Nikolai was in it. When the colonel found out that this routine had been going on for almost 2 years, with no change in Nikolai's behavior, he exploded. "You mean to tell me that you've been locking this man up in this crate for 2 years and it hasn't done any good? Even with this type of punishment, he is still being disobedient, insubordinate, or whatever you want to call it. Did it ever occur to you that there may be a good reason why this man isn't following your orders? Open the box." Yuri, the guard, helped Nikolai out of the box, but he was too weak to stand at attention properly. As he lay on the pile of straw, he explained to the colonel about his Sabbath convictions. He also said he would work hard to do 7 days worth of work in 6 days to make up for the time he would miss on Saturdays. The colonel asked the warden if there was a job that could be done in 6 days, like Nikolai was offering. The warden thought a while and finally described a routine that might work. The camp needed its water supply brought in barrels from a spring that was about a kilometer away. Oleg, the man who was currently doing the job, worked all day, every day, with an old ox and a cart to bring the amount of water that was needed. If Nikolai could haul 7 days worth of water in 6 days, he could have Saturdays off. Even though the warden was very skeptical whether the arrangement could possibly work, he was willing to give it a try. The next day was Tuesday. If Nikolai could bring in enough water by Friday night, he could have Saturday off. The next morning, Nikolai was up before dawn, helping Oleg hitch Maxim, the old ox, to the cart to get started on his new assignment. He needed to make 25 trips to the spring and back by Friday evening, 2 barrels per trip. But it was a very frustrating situation. Maxim, the old ox, had only one speed, a slow plod. No matter how much Nikolai tried to encourage and prod the ox to speed up, it didn't happen. By Thursday evening, he had only managed to accomplish 6 trips per day, even working from before sunup until after sundown. That meant he had to get 7 loads on Friday with enough time left before sundown to prepare for Sabbath. It seemed impossible, and he dreaded the thought of going back into that box. Friday morning, Nikolai went out early, again to rouse up old Maxim and hitch him to the cart, but he was surprised to find the ox already standing and restless to get going. There was a complete change. Instead of plodding along at his usual rate, he ran so fast that Nikolai could hardly keep up, and he kept it up all day so that by evening the job was done. Nikolai had a Sabbath off. This routine went on for the next 7 years. From Sunday through Thursday, Maxim would plod along at his usual slow pace, and on Friday he went in high gear all day so that Nikolai consistently fulfilled his quota of water barrels in time to get ready for Sabbath. The other prisoners were impressed by his consistent witness and the weekly miracle of the seventh-day ox. Some of them accepted Jesus and were secretly baptized. One day, the same colonel came back to the camp for another inspection, and after hearing the story of the miracle and Nikolai's faithful service, he signed release papers for him, and he was able to go back home and carry on working as a pastor in Kiev. But the story goes on. The new man who took over the water hauling job got a huge surprise when old Maxim carried on the same routine, slow plodding Sunday through Thursday and racing full speed on Friday. The seventh-day ox continued to witness for God even after Nikolai was gone. Now, you've probably noticed a theme in there of all these stories that Sabbath is significant. God taught the people in Alaska about Sabbath. He taught the people in South America about Sabbath. He did these miracles, and Sabbath is very significant. And, it's interesting that this old ox got to rest on Sabbath too. The fourth commandment says that even the animals should rest on the seventh day. There's something interesting that scientists have been studying for a while, and I'm not sure when it was first thought about or discovered, but you've maybe heard of it. It's called the circadian rhythm, and it's kind of a natural rhythm that is a daily routine. And there are plants and animals that have this basically a 24-hour routine of things that happen in the morning, things that happen in the evening, and all of that. Some plants, their leaves will wilt at night and spread upward during the day. Some flowers open in the daytime and close at night, like the dandelion. You go out early in the morning and you'll see the dandelions opening. They're open through the day, and at night they close up. Others do the opposite. The evening primrose opens in the evening, stays open all night, and closes in the morning. And sunflowers, it's interesting how in the morning, they'll be the young sunflowers, at least when the heads are first developing, they'll be facing to the east when the sun comes up, and through the day, they slowly follow the sun so that they're facing the west at sundown. And then during the night, they turn back so that they're facing east, ready for the sun to come up the next day. Now, when they finally get big, and the commercial sunflowers, like we've raised some here in North Dakota, they get those big heads on them with, there's heads this big. They'll finally settle so that they're facing east all the time. They don't turn with the sun when they get to a certain stage of growth. But these cycles, these daily cycles, aren't totally dependent on just the sun. Back in 1729, a French scientist did an experiment where he took some of these plants, they call them a touch-me-not or a sensitive plant. Maybe some of you have seen them. If you touch the leaves, the leaves will immediately wilt. But they also go through a cycle of drooping during the night and then coming up again the next morning. And this scientist over in France took some of those plants and put them in a totally dark cellar for days, for days on end. And they still did the same routine. In the evening, even though they had no sunlight, in the evening they would drop their leaves, and in the morning they would have their leaves up again. And so he realized that this circadian rhythm, this daily routine of these plants, was not dependent on the sun. And it was something that was part of the plant. It was some internal mechanism. And we as humans have kind of a daily routine too. You get up at a certain time, you get used to waking up at that time, and even without an alarm clock, you'll typically wake up approximately at the same time. You usually eat your meals at the same time, and they say that your body chemistry prepares for eating the meal at that time. And if you eat at a little different time, it's not quite matched to your body chemistry. And so it's good to keep that routine. And our working cycle, or whatever we do, it's kind of a regular routine. And probably a lot of you have experienced jet lag. If you cross time zones, especially where you go from one time zone to another one, multiple, 6 hours away or whatever it is, you have jet lag. That's because your body is used to a certain routine, and it takes a while to adjust. They say for every time zone you cross when you're traveling like that, it takes you about 1 day to readjust so that you're ready for the time zone that you are in. And they've actually done experiments where they have taken people, out of a daily routine and put them in a place, in a situation like in an underground cave or something, where they absolutely have no view of the sun. There's no sunlight, and they still carry on basically a 24-hour routine in their life. And like places in Alaska, up in the Arctic Circle, above the Arctic Circle, where the sun doesn't even set in the summertime, people still have a regular, generally a 24-hour routine. This is something that is internal. It's a daily thing that's internal. And one of the major factors in our daily cycle like that is a hormone that's called melatonin. And in the daytime, our eyes send a signal to the pineal gland that's in the middle of our brain that stops melatonin from being produced. But in the evening, when the sun goes down and the light gets dimmer, your eyes sense that, and they send a signal to the pineal gland to start producing melatonin. And melatonin is what helps you relax and feel sleepy. It's what helps you go to sleep in the evening. And it's a daily rhythm that's kind of based on the daylight and nighttime cycle. So these daily rhythms, the circadian rhythm is something that's built into us. Well, scientists and medical people have also been learning about another cycle that we have. It's called the circaseptan rhythm, which is a 7-day cycle. And this is interesting. They've been learning about this for I don't know, 20 or 30 years, but they still don't really know a whole lot about it. And it's not just based on the calendar that we have on the wall that has 7 days in a row, and then you have the weekend, or however you want to say that. You have 6 working days and then a day of rest or whatever. It's not based on that. It's something that is different. And it's in other forms of life besides humans. They've found this in all kinds of creation, all kinds of creatures. Here's the technical term for it, circaseptan. Circa means around or approximately, and septan means 7 days. So circaseptan rhythm is approximately 7-day rhythm. And they have found this 7-day rhythm in rats and mice and guinea pigs and flies and even algae and bacteria and plants. Now you wonder, well, why do these things have a 7-day rhythm, and what is it that changes in their cycle? And wild animals and algae and all that, they don't have a calendar on the wall, so it's not something that's based on a human tradition or anything like that. Well, I've got some interesting little stories here again. They studied some laboratory rats. I forget, I think this was in England. They studied these rats and they found that their melatonin levels were highest. In other words, the melatonin is what helps us and other creatures get drowsy, sleepy, more relaxed. That these rats' melatonin levels was lowest, or highest, I should say. It was highest on Saturdays and lowest on Thursday, but then it started increasing on Friday till it was the highest again on Saturday. Now, that's an interesting thing. Why would rats have a cycle like that, where they would be more relaxed on Saturday than on other days? There's a doctor, his name is Sang Lee. He has gone around the world giving health lectures, and he's gone several times to Brazil, and he talked with some of the people down there, and some of the local native beekeepers told him that their bees don't come out of their hives on Saturday. So they don't do their busy bee work on Saturday. Interesting. You've possibly heard about the seventh-day beavers. Laren Cole observed a colony of beavers in Northern California for over 16 years. And he and his family noticed that the beavers would be out busy any other day, but when they went out there to watch them on Sabbath, the beavers weren't out. They rested on Sabbath. The next day, Sunday, they took up their busy beaver activities again. And there's a bird watcher living in Michigan, or at least he used to live in Michigan. His name is Miles Willard. He's a bird watcher and a photographer, and he studied the migrating birds that came through his area And he took notice that on Sabbaths, they did not show up nearly as much as on other days. The ones that were passing through were they just weren't there. So even animals, some animals have a 7-day cycle. Now here's an interesting one. When our teeth are developing, the enamel forms in microscopically daily layers, okay? About every 7 days, the rate of enamel secretion slows down and leaves a slightly different looking layer called a stria of Retzius. And you can see the arrow pointing to the little lines on these teeth here. And these teeth, these layers can be seen under a microscope as tiny ridges in the enamel on the surface of the tooth. And so every 7 days, there's a change in how the enamel is forming in our teeth. There's a company that has developed an app for smartphones that helps people monitor their mood throughout each day. It's called Mood Fit. And as people go through the day with their smartphone, they can look at this app, and the app has questions about how things are going during the day, how they feel, and all these different questions. And the purpose of this app is to show or to help the person take notice of how their mood is affected by different things that happen during the day, and how they can be aware of this and possibly adjust some things in their life so that they can feel better. Okay. Apparently, this app sends some information back to the developers, and the developers there decided to do some research on the information they were getting back from this app that they put out. And so they gathered data on people's daily patterns of their moods through a whole year. So this research went on for a whole year. Then they plotted it on a graph showing the days of the week and how their moods changed each day. And here's the graph. Mondays were the lowest, the least positive. Saturdays were the highest, the most positive. This is actually a graph from their website. Another research thing that I found was that some researchers gathered a bunch of data on Google searches that included the word health or healthy. And so they could say, well, if people are putting in a search for something that's related to health or something that's related to being healthy, that indicates something about what they're looking for, and some of the reasons why they might be looking for this. And so I read through the statistics they had there, and I put together a graph showing how their statistics look on a graph. So Monday through Wednesday, people were looking for health-related information at the highest level. They were looking for healthy things at the beginning of the week. And as the week went on and they got to Thursday, they started looking less and less for health-related things, which seems to indicate that they were feeling better about themselves and they didn't feel such a need for health-related things. And on Saturday, it was the very lowest. And then Sunday, it started to increase again. It's just interesting to see this kind of a pattern. Now, you can take that you can interpret that in various ways, but it appears that people are feeling better toward the end of the week. And it's interesting that medical people have found that there are a lot of health-related things and body chemistry-related things that have a 7-day cycle. Now, they haven't necessarily pinpointed it to that Sabbath is a special thing in that, but there is a 7-day cycle in a lot of different things. Body chemistry, blood pressure, all kinds of things. And one example of that's really obvious, and it's even talked about in the Bible, is that when a baby boy is born, right after birth, his body has to go through some adjustments and developing certain aspects of his body chemistry to prepare him for life outside of his mother's womb, where everything was, all shielded and he was all protected and everything. His immune system, his hormone levels, his blood system, and all of that makes adjustments so that by the seventh day, all of these systems and chemical levels are at the ideal time for him to be circumcised. And the Bible tells us that in Genesis 17:12, he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you, every man child in your generations. The 8th day is the very best day for that little baby boy to be circumcised, because all of his body systems are balanced out to the right level for that point. 7 days of development, and then the 8th day is the ideal time. So how does all this 7-day cycle stuff come about? Why do we have a 7-day week? Why do we have a calendar that shows us 7 days? Well, there's nothing in the sun, moon, and stars that give us 7 days. It takes 1 day for the earth to rotate. So as the sun, we say the sun goes across the sky, but it's actually the earth rotating. That takes 1 day. It takes 29 and a half days for the moon to circle around the earth, and that gives us, in general, a month. Well, the moon cycle is 29 and a half days. And the yearly cycle is 365 and a quarter days, or real close to that. Well, none of those give us 7 days. You can't evenly divide a moon cycle and come out with an even 7. You can't divide the yearly cycle of 365 and come out with a nice even 7. Somewhere we were given the 7-day cycle from a different source. Well, if you look into encyclopedias and different sources like that, here's a definition of the week from Encyclopedia Britannica. A period of 7 days, a unit of time artificially devised with no astronomical basis. It's not in the sun, moon, or stars. The week's origin is generally associated with the ancient Jews and the biblical account of the creation, according to which God labored for 6 days and rested on the 7th. So they're saying, it looks like it came from the Jews. Well, then they go on and they say, evidence indicates, however, that the Jews may have borrowed the idea of the week from Mesopotamia, for the Sumerians and the Babylonians divided the year into weeks of 7 days each, one of which they designated a day of recreation. Well, we know that at creation, God established a 7-day cycle. The Sumerians and the Babylonians came after that. And so they got that 7-day cycle from when God created the whole system. And then, of course, he presented the Sabbath and reminded the Jews about the Sabbath, and then they needed to remember the Sabbath. The Jews didn't borrow that Sabbath concept from the people around them. The people around them got it from the Jews. And through history, there's been several times when people said, well, we don't want the 7-day cycle. Let's try a different week, a different length for the week. Well, one of those attempts was during the French Revolution in the 1700s, where they tried out a 10-day week, but that didn't work. People got so tired and worn out that they couldn't keep functioning. And they finally decided, after trying that for, I think it was for a year and a half, they finally went back to the 7-day week, and things kind of stabilized. Well, then Joseph Stalin, when he brought in communism and really, really enforced it, he tried to get everybody to go to a 6-day week. And he had different arrangements that this was supposed to be a very efficient way of carrying on business and doing work and everything like that. And that didn't work either. That everything got messed up. And so they ended up going back to the 7-day week. And pretty much the whole world is on a 7-day cycle. And our calendars were arranged that way because people just work that way. Now, to conclude this, I'm going to quote from a business magazine. And this business magazine is totally a secular magazine. And you can go online and you can find this magazine online, and they have all kinds of articles on how to run your business better. And and all kinds of ideas on business matters. And it's called Brains Magazine. And they had this article there. The title of the article is The Secret to a Healthier You, the 7-Day Biological Clock. And so I'm going to quote some paragraphs directly from this article. This is a secular business magazine. It's fascinating to discover that the 7-day week, as we know it today, was not always a universal concept. The concept of a 7-day week appears to have part of its roots in the culture of the ancient Hebrews, who designated each day of the week by a number rather than a name. The significance of the 7-day cycle for the Hebrews was closely tied to the religious commandment to observe the Sabbath day. According to Exodus 20, verse 9 through 11, well, it actually starts in verse 8, but anyway, the Sabbath day was to be kept holy as a day of rest. The commandment further specified that work should be done for 6 days, but on the 7th day, one should rest, as it was the Sabbath day of the Lord. What is interesting to note is that the Hebrews' tradition of observing the Sabbath day has endured and still influences societal behaviors in the present day. Throughout history, in more than 100 ancient and modern languages, the 7th day of the week, Saturday, has been commonly referred to as the Sabbath, which means rest. And that's what the Hebrew word Shabbat means, is stop your work, rest. For example, in Spanish, Saturday is called Sabado. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but anyway. In Russian, Saboto. In Latin, Sabbatum. In Italian, Sabato. And in Somali, Sabti. This day is also considered sacred in many cultures and religions, including Judaism and Christianity, and is typically observed by refraining from work and engaging in religious activities, spending time with family and friends, or simply taking a break from the hustle and bustle of daily life. The concept of a day of rest has been an important aspect of human culture for centuries and continues to hold significance in many societies around the world. This fact is a testament to the lasting influence of ancient traditions and the power of cultural exchange on modern culture. It's a reminder that many of our present-day behaviors and practices are shaped by the traditions and customs of those who came before us. And in the case of the Sabbath day, it's a reminder of the importance of prioritizing rest and recovery in our daily lives. And then the very end of the article, they actually quote this verse from Genesis 2 and 3. And on the 7th day, God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the 7th day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the 7th day and sanctified it, because in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made. I thought it was very fascinating that a secular magazine would present the Sabbath in that way. And we go back to this verse that I started with. The Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. We were programmed from the very beginning that our body functions the best and we need it for our spiritual renewal. And there's so many different things that we need Sabbath for. And it's important enough that God revealed it to the natives in Alaska and the natives in South America. And he's done all these things all around the world. Sabbath is significant, and we were designed to keep Sabbath. I just wanted to share that. It was just such a fascinating thing to find those stories and that information on the Sabbath. So, Sabbath was made for us.
Very fascinating. That's a lot of good information. I love the flowers, what they do.
Yeah. And there's quite a few that have that daily cycle of opening and closing, and some at night, some in the daytime, but they open and close. And yeah, it's interesting.
Does anybody have anything else to say? I looked it up. That manna seems to still happen.
Yeah, apparently it's still showing up there on certain days, and the people go out and gather it, and it tastes good, just like the Bible talks about.
It's weird that I think it said Wednesday and Friday, or
Yeah,
Monday and Wednesday, or whatever it was, 2 days a week.
Wednesday
But,
and Friday. Yeah.
It's amazing. God is there. He's in everything. People just don't see it.
And he establishes which day is the Sabbath by not giving it on Sabbath, just like he did for the people of Israel.
Yes.
Yeah,
And the
that was
animals
really
that
good.
rest.
I love seeing all those things. And you didn't even touch on the beavers, right? But I think you've already touched on that, or somebody has. But I think that's plenty of evidence for the fact that the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. It's
Yeah.
the day for refreshing. And yeah, again, we're about to go on our picnic out on some trails and enjoy lovely things outdoors and see all the critters that God and Jesus made, and it's a great blessing. I like the Sabbath, so I like hearing that stuff. That's really cool. You found a lot of good stuff, Kimber. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I look forward to Sabbath starting Monday morning.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, anybody have anything else to say? They're probably saying it out on YouTube and stuff. But anyway, thank you very much, Kimber. And Brent too, wherever he went.
Looks like that place where
Yes.
Sandy is, or that beach. I think it's sunlight there 24 hours a day.
Very peaceful looking.
Hey, Keith. Keith, tell Violet and Carol I said hi.
Okay, will do.
And we will have Keith and Brent next Sabbath. And again, we don't have anything this Wednesday, so we will see everybody on Sabbath. And thank you again, Kimber. Let me know when you have time again. These are always good.
Okay. Happy Sabbath to everybody.
All right.
Bye for now.
Happy Sabbath.
Thank you and happy Sabbath.